She's just the janitor, useless in a real fight. That was the judgment, the dismissive whisper echoing through the barracks for years. Clara Mitchell had swept floors, polished rifles, and moved unseen. A ghost in a world that measured strength only by rank and muscle. But destiny doesn't ask permission. The rifles fell silent. 15 recruits knelt with guns pressed to their heads. Time was running out. Then across the killing field, a woman in faded coveralls stepped into the open. Clara Mitchell. To everyone watching, she was invisible, insignificant. Yet within minutes, they would discover a brutal truth. Sometimes the deadliest warrior is the one no one ever notices. The day at Fort Benning began, as it always did. The echo of boots on concrete, the bark of drill sergeants, the clatter of rifles on racks. Soldiers bustled with purpose, their uniforms crisp, their voices sharp with authority. In the middle of all that order and noise, one figure moved unseen. Clara Mitchell pushed her cleaning cart across the armory floor, the mop bucket squeaking with every bump of the wheels, the faint scent of disinfectant trailing after her. No one saluted her. No one stopped to ask her name. To most, she was just part of the background, as forgettable as the dust she swept from the corners. Years of being overlooked had carved a rhythm into her life. She swept floors, polished rifles, emptied bins, and vanished again into the quiet. But there was something different about Clara if anyone had ever bothered to look closer. When she polished a rifle, her hands didn't fumble like someone unfamiliar with its weight. Her fingers traced the metal with intimate precision, disassembling and reassembling faster than many of the recruits she cleaned up after. When she swept the training range, her eyes didn't just scan for brass casings. They measured distances, counted seconds between echoes, tracked the way flags shifted in the wind. None of it was conscious, at least not fully. It was instinct, buried deep and waiting. The tragedy was that no one noticed. Soldiers marched past her every day, blind to the truth at their feet. And isn't that society's curse? We measure worth by ribbons on the chest or rank on the shoulder. We cheer the loud, the visible, the ones who know how to be seen. But the quiet workers, the janitors, the cooks, the clerks, are dismissed as insignificant. Their labor keeps the world running, but their faces fade into the background. Clara Mitchell had become an expert at being invisible. She moved through the armory that morning with the same careful efficiency she always did. A dropped rag here, a wiped barrel there. A recruit clumsily knocked a box of cartridges off the table. Bullets rolled across the floor in chaotic arcs. Clara knelt swiftly, her hand shooting out. One cartridge spun fast, but she snatched it before it could fall into the grate. The recruit blinked. "Nice catch," he muttered, barely paying attention, before hurrying off. He never noticed how fast she had moved, how sharp her reflexes were. Another day during a storm, Clara had paused in the middle of sweeping the range. The flags whipped violently in the wind, cloth snapping like gunfire. She stood still, lips moving as she murmured corrections. 8 clicks left, 10 if the gust holds. A drill sergeant overheard and scoffed. "Crazy janitor," he chuckled before marching on. He didn't realize her mutterings were windage adjustments, the kind snipers whisper before they take impossible shots. Clara let them laugh. She always let them. Invisibility was safer than attention, but silence has its own kind of power. Ghosts see everything, and Clara was a ghost in a world that measured strength only by rank and muscle. She knew which recruits cried at night when homesickness broke their bravado. She knew who skipped cleaning their rifles properly, who slipped contraband into their bunks, who lied on their marksmanship scores. She didn't seek these things out. They simply revealed themselves to someone who moved unnoticed. Every small detail painted a picture. Every careless whisper filled in the gaps. And Clara, for all her invisibility, carried a sharper awareness of the base than many of its commanders. Still, she played her role with quiet discipline. Shoulders slightly hunched, eyes lowered, voice soft when spoken to. She never corrected anyone, never showed more than she had to. She wore invisibility like armor, and perhaps in its own way, that was her survival, because Clara Mitchell was not who she appeared to be. Commentary tells us that history has always underestimated its silent figures. The inventor sweeping factory floors, the clerk writing by candlelight. the nurse no one thought would step onto the battlefield. We overlook them because we want heroes to look a certain way: loud, strong, decorated. But often the real heroes hide in plain sight, their greatness buried under layers of humility or necessity. At Fort Benning, Clara Mitchell seemed fragile, even meek. To everyone around her, she was nothing more than a cleaner. But there were moments, fleeting, easy to miss, when her mask slipped, the steadiness in her hands, the instinctive way she measured distance without thinking, the sharpness that glimmered in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Most dismissed it as nothing, but one day soon, those small glimpses would matter. The woman in faded coveralls, overlooked, unseen, invisible, was carrying a fire the world had chosen to forget, and destiny, as it always does, would demand that fire again. The morning quiet shattered in an instant. It wasn't the controlled bursts of training fire echoing across Fort Benning. This was different, harsher, chaotic, the unmistakable rhythm of Eastern Bloc weapons, Kalashnikovs. Clara Mitchell froze mid-step in the armory corridor, the mop still in her hand. Her ears didn't just hear the sound. They measured it, identified caliber, distance, number of shooters. Old reflexes flickered, uninvited, like ghosts clawing back into her chest. Outside, pandemonium erupted. A dozen Chechen insurgents, led by the ruthless Rashid Kamarov, had emerged from forgotten maintenance tunnels beneath the training complex. Their timing was flawless. 15 recruits, kids barely out of high school, were caught off guard. Among them was Lena Park, a 19-year-old from San Francisco, who had joined the army to pay for college and prove to her immigrant parents that their sacrifices meant something. Now she knelt with the others on the parade ground, a rifle barrel pressed to her temple. Kamarov's voice snarled over stolen military frequencies, his English sharp and venomous. 30 minutes. Release our brothers from custody, or these children die. Every 10 minutes of delay, one American life. Clara's heart tightened. She had seen terrorists before, the kind that made threats for show and the kind that carried them out. Kamarov belonged to the latter. Captain Ryan Cole was already moving across the field with his Delta team. 6'3", built like a machine, Cole had never known defeat. His record was spotless, his confidence unshakable. But confidence had no armor against what came next. From hidden kill zones, insurgents opened fire. Crossfire tore across the field. 3 Delta snipers crumpled instantly, blood pooling into the dirt. Cole and his last man, Master Sergeant Alvarez, dove behind a barrier, pinned and helpless. The perfect record was cracking. Inside the armory, Clara ducked low, but she didn't cower. Her body remembered too much. Angles, distances, wind drift. She saw it all, as if her brain had been waiting years for this single moment. The door slammed open. Captain Cole burst inside, eyes burning with desperation. He scanned the room. Weapons racks, ammo crates, then landed on her. "You!" he barked. Clara stiffened. "I'm just staff. I clean—" "Shut up." His hand clamped her arm with iron force, dragging her toward the lockers. "Can you run?" "What?" "A simple question. Can you run in a zigzag for 30 seconds without falling?" Clara hesitated, then nodded, breath caught between confusion and something deeper. Recognition. Cole shoved a heavy tactical vest into her hands. The plates weighed more than her week's wages. The encrypted comms hummed faintly inside the lining. She slipped it on like she'd done 100 times before, though no one was supposed to know that. Alvarez stared in disbelief. "Captain, you're sending a civilian out there?" "We don't have options," Cole growled. His voice was like grinding steel, but underneath was something raw. Fear. "She runs, they shoot. We mark their positions. Tactical necessity." Clara's fingers trembled against the vest straps. Bait. That was what she was. A decoy. A disposable piece on the board. Through the armory window, the tower loomed. 8 stories of concrete, shadows filled with rifle barrels. The open ground stretched 60 yards, an arena of death. Cole's words cut through the air. "It's that or 15 kids die. Your choice." Clara swallowed. Somewhere on that field, Lena Park's heartbeat raced against cold steel. Clara's own heart, though scarred and weary, found rhythm again. She pushed open the door. The morning sun painted long streaks across the dust. "Move!" Cole shouted. Clara sprinted. Bullets screamed immediately, shredding concrete where she had been a heartbeat before. She cut left, legs pumping harder than they had in years. Another burst ripped past. Her body twisted instinctively, zigzagging, not from Cole's orders, but from muscle memory burned into her bones long ago. She wasn't the janitor anymore. Dragunov cracks filled the air. Russian rifles. Clara identified them without thought, each report etching into her mind the shooter's position. Her breath came steady, not panicked. She darted right, rolled across gravel, and kept moving. Behind her, Cole and Alvarez shouted coordinates. "Third floor, left window, mark it." Clara slid hard into cover, chest heaving, dust clinging to sweat. Her ears rang, but inside the ringing was clarity. The tower wasn't just a structure, it was a puzzle. Angles, crosswinds, kill zones. She saw it all like a map unfolding. For the first time, Cole looked at her not as bait, but with a flicker of recognition. "What the hell is she?" he muttered. Alvarez whispered almost to himself, "Not just a janitor." Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. Her hands were already steadying against the ground, eyes tracking the glint of a scope in a shadowed window. Her instincts had awakened, uncoiling like a predator long caged. Commentary. This is where people fail, by assuming uniforms define ability, and silence equals weakness. Clara had been invisible for years, but invisibility is not absence. It is patience. It is the art of waiting until the moment the world finally needs what you've been hiding. Across the field, Lena Park clenched her eyes shut, waiting for death. She didn't know that salvation had already begun running through the dust. Not from generals, not from decorated captains, but from the ghost everyone ignored. Clara Mitchell, the cleaner who never belonged, had just stepped back into the war. Dust clung to Clara Mitchell's coveralls as she pressed her body against the cracked barrier at the edge of the field. Her chest rose and fell, but her breathing was steady. Too steady for someone who was supposed to be a janitor caught in the middle of a war zone. She glanced up, eyes narrowing against the glare of the sun, and saw the faint glint of a rifle scope on the 5th floor of the tower. Her instincts took over. She shifted, using the shattered remains of a rifle dropped by a fallen Delta operator. Her hands moved with a fluid certainty that betrayed years of training, not months of mopping floors. Safety check, chamber, windage. She had done it 1,000 times in another life, under another name. Clara wasn't fumbling, she was remembering. A deep calm settled in her chest. The kind of calm that comes not from ignorance of danger, but from intimate knowledge of it. The chaos around her faded into silence. There was only the faint tug of wind against her cheek, the dust lifting in little spirals, and the heartbeat pause between trigger squeeze and thunder. She fired. The shot cracked across the base like a verdict. 8 stories up, a sniper's head jerked back. Lifeless, his Dragunov slipping from his hands and tumbling out the window. For a moment, the field went utterly still. Even the terrorists froze, stunned that their invisible advantage had just been shattered by a bullet they never saw coming. Cole stared in disbelief. "That's impossible," he muttered, but Clara didn't stop. She reloaded with practiced precision, eyes scanning for the next glint, the next breath out of place in the shadows of the tower. Another crack, another body fell, then another. 3 enemies neutralized in less than 90 seconds. Each shot surgical, each kill undeniable. The radios erupted with frantic chatter. "Who is that shooter?" voices demanded across multiple frequencies. In the command center, Colonel Hannah Price leaned forward over the tactical display, her brows knitting. She'd been preparing casualty reports minutes earlier, her heart heavy with the knowledge she might have to call 15 families before noon. But now red icons marking enemy positions were disappearing from her screen, one after another. Price's aide, a young lieutenant, shook his head in awe. "Ma'am, that's not standard Delta formation. Those shots, their signature." Price's lips pressed into a thin line. A memory stirred. She had seen that stance before, years ago, in a war zone where the line between survival and annihilation was measured in millimeters. The way the shooter shifted weight, the rhythm of breathing, the audacity to attempt shots no manual would ever teach. It was like watching a ghost return. Her throat tightened. "It can't be," she whispered. The aide blinked. "Ma'am? Do not engage that shooter," Price snapped, louder now, her voice carrying steel. "Repeat, all units. Do not fire on the friendly in play. That is a direct order. Chaku." "Who is she?" the lieutenant asked, his voice trembling between awe and fear. Price's answer came softly, almost to herself. "Phantom." The name carried weight. For years, Phantom was a legend whispered in military circles. The sniper who made impossible shots that saved entire squads. The ghost who disappeared after Operation Blackwater. Officially, Phantom had died in Syria. Unofficially, there had always been rumors that she walked away, broken by betrayal, that she buried herself in anonymity because the truth was too heavy to carry. And now here she was, kneeling in the dirt in Janitor's coveralls, making ghosts of men who thought they had the upper hand. Back on the field, Clara shifted positions, rolling to avoid the retaliatory fire now tearing through the barriers. Chips of concrete sprayed against her arms, but she didn't flinch. Another scope glinted, faint against the haze. She slowed her breathing, narrowed her focus, and squeezed. The tower window exploded into silence as yet another enemy fell. The recruits watched through tear-filled eyes, hope igniting where despair had rooted only minutes before. Lena Park, still on her knees with a rifle barrel pressed against her head, dared to believe she might live to see another sunrise. Clara's instincts had fully awakened now, and with them came the weight of memory. Every trigger pull carried ghosts, men and women she couldn't save, comrades lost to betrayals no one ever spoke of. Each bullet was not just precision, it was penance. What we see here isn't just skill, it's the return of someone who never truly left the battlefield. Veterans like Clara carry scars the world cannot see. They vanish into ordinary jobs, janitors, bus drivers, cashiers. Not because they are weak, but because the silence feels safer than the battlefield. The truth is, some wars never end. They simply change uniforms. Society has a cruel blindness. We thank veterans in public, salute them on holidays, but rarely ask about the nights they can't sleep. The weight of names carved into their memory. We mistake invisibility for insignificance, not realizing that behind the quiet clerk or the weary custodian might be someone who once held the lives of dozens in their steady hands. Clara Mitchell was living proof of that paradox. To the soldiers around her, she had been nothing more than background noise. Yet here, under fire, her true self erupted back into the open. Not because she wanted glory, but because the alternative was watching 15 young lives disappear into the dirt. Bullets slowed. Terrorists who had mocked their hostages now hid deeper in the tower's shadows. Kamarov's voice crackled with frustration over the radio. "Who is this?" His certainty was unraveling. Clara's hand steadied against the rifle. She didn't answer. From the command center, Price exhaled, her eyes hard. "Phantom, you should have stayed dead," she murmured, though whether it was warning or grief, even she couldn't say. But destiny had dragged Phantom back into the light. And on that bloodied morning at Fort Benning, the myth was no longer myth. She was flesh, bone, and fire. And the world would have to face the truth it had buried. The last shot still echoed when the tower fell into silence. Smoke curled upward, and the ground was littered with rifles the terrorists no longer held. Clara Mitchell, the woman the base had dismissed as invisible, had done the unthinkable. But victory was only a temporary reprieve. Colonel Hannah Price strode across the parade ground, her boots striking hard against the dust. Soldiers flanked her, weapons ready, their eyes still wide from what they had just witnessed. Price's expression was unreadable, a mixture of relief, anger, and something deeper, recognition. She stopped in front of Clara, who was still kneeling with the rifle balanced on her lap. Price's voice was cold steel. "Remove your coveralls." Clara froze. "Ma'am, that's an order." Hands trembling, Clara pulled down the faded coveralls. Beneath them, the plain tank top revealed what Price feared and expected. Scar tissue along the shoulder, and beneath it, the tattoo, a skull wearing a ghillie hood, crosshairs etched over one eye. Below it, numbers that no one outside her unit should have known. Gasps rippled among the soldiers. Phantom. The name cut through the air like a blade. Officially, Phantom had died in Syria during Operation Blackwater. Unofficially, her name had lingered like a ghost story, whispered in the barracks. And now, here she was, standing in the open, flesh and blood. Price's jaw tightened. "Jessica Hayes," she said, using the name Clara had buried 3 years ago. "You are under arrest for desertion and for abandoning your unit during a classified operation." Clara met her gaze without flinching. "You mean the operation that was designed to kill us from the start?" The silence was heavier than gunfire. Her mind was dragged back to Syria 3 years earlier. Operation Blackwater, a simple mission, or so they were told. Extract a high-value asset from a compound in eastern Syria, a man claiming knowledge of a chemical weapons plot. 12 operators, all elite, moved like shadows through the desert night. Clara, Jessica Hayes back then, was their long-range eye, Phantom on the ridge. The infiltration was flawless. Resistance was weak, too weak. The asset was waiting, hands raised, surrendering almost too easily. The team believed they'd won. And then the world exploded. RPG fire rained from every direction. Enemies surged out of the ground like ants from a nest. The operators fought like lions, but the trap had been sprung too perfectly. They weren't meant to survive. Through her scope, Jessica saw comrades, brothers and sisters she had trained with for years, fall one by one. She covered them as long as she could, every shot a scream of denial, but the onslaught was overwhelming. By dawn, 12 operators were dead, or so the official report claimed. Only she had crawled away, wounded and half-broken, dragging herself into obscurity. The mission had been written off as a failed extraction. The world believed Phantom died in the desert, but Jessica knew better. It wasn't a failure. It was a betrayal. Back in the present, Price's accusations rang out in the command center later that day. "You vanished. You left your team to die. You betrayed your oath." Clara's answer was steady, measured. "I didn't run. I survived. And I kept proof." The room fell silent as she reached into her mouth, working loose a false molar. She placed it on the table. A storage chip, disguised as a tooth, gleamed under the fluorescent light. "Everything is here," Clara said. "Comms recordings, satellite intercepts, medical logs, evidence that Operation Blackwater wasn't an ambush by chance. It was orchestrated. Our asset wasn't an informant. He was bait, and someone inside our own system set us up." The officers in the room shifted uneasily. Some scoffed, others leaned forward with dawning fear. Colonel Price stared at the chip as though it might burn her hand. "This is treasonous talk," she warned. "It's truth," Clara shot back. "I tried official channels. I was dismissed as delusional, unstable, traumatized. They wanted the story buried, so I buried myself instead, as Clara Mitchell, as no one." The doors burst open. A squad of guards entered, escorting a tall figure in full colonel's uniform. His presence radiated authority, his stride unhurried, his smirk practiced. Clara's blood ran cold. Adrian Wolfe, the man she had seen in Syria. The so-called asset they were sent to extract. Alive, decorated, and standing in a U.S. uniform. "Well," Wolfe said smoothly, "the ghost returns." Gasps filled the room. Officers who had doubted Clara now stared at Wolfe in disbelief. "You," Clara whispered. "You were the bait." "And the fisherman," Wolfe replied with a cruel smile. "You were never supposed to leave Syria alive, Phantom, but you always did have a talent for ruining clean operations." The room erupted in shouts. Betrayal was a bitter taste, and many officers recoiled at the implication that one of their own was the mastermind. Price's face drained of color. "Colonel Wolfe, this can't—" "Oh, it can," Clara cut in, her voice sharp. "He needed operators captured alive. Blackwater wasn't about intel. It was about testing, conditioning. We weren't supposed to win. We were subjects." Wolfe's smile didn't falter. If anything, it deepened. "You survived, Jessica. That makes you special and very dangerous. Ani, this is the hidden wound of service. Not the enemy's bullet, but betrayal from within. Soldiers swear to fight for their nation, trusting the chain of command, believing sacrifice has purpose. But when betrayal comes from the same flag you've bled for, the wound never heals. Many veterans disappear, not because they are weak, but because they've glimpsed this rot, this corruption behind polished metals. They fade into anonymity because silence is safer than speaking a truth no one wants to hear. Clara Mitchell had carried that silence for 3 years. Now forced into the open, she placed her evidence on the table for all to see. Whether anyone had the courage to face it was another question. Colonel Hannah Price turned between Wolf and Clara, her loyalty at war with her conscience. The room held its breath, and in that suspended silence, one thing was clear. Phantom's war was no longer in the shadows. The betrayal of Operation Blackwater had just stepped back into the light, and its architect, Adrian Wolf, was very much alive. The command center had become a storm. Shouts collided with denials, officers pounding fists against polished tables, while the evidence Clara placed in front of them pulsed like a ticking bomb. Adrian Wolf stood tall, uniform pristine, his smirk unchanged. He wasn't denying it. Not fully. He didn't need to. His presence, his rank, his decorations were his shield. Clara knew the truth alone was never enough. Truth had to be carried, exposed, and sometimes purchased with blood or freedom. Colonel Hannah Price turned to her, eyes sharp. You realize what you've done? By coming back, by showing this, you've put yourself in chains. Desertion, insubordination, handling classified material. They'll bury you. Clara's lips curved into the faintest, bitterest smile. They already did. 3 years ago. Guards moved in. The click of restraints echoed as cold metal locked around her wrists. Clara didn't resist. She lifted her chin, steady, even as Wolf's satisfied smirk followed her. For him, the game wasn't over. For Clara, it was. Or so it seemed. The evidence in that tiny chip was too strong to vanish. Journalists hungry for leaks, senators tired of cover-ups, allies who demanded accountability. Once the files reached daylight, the story spread like wildfire. The betrayal of Operation Blackwater splashed across headlines, shaking the intelligence community to its core. Clara never testified in public. She didn't sit before committees or cameras. Instead, she sat in a secure cell, branded a criminal, while her truth rattled the walls of power. And maybe that was her sacrifice. Not the bullet or the battlefield, but the silence of confinement while others debated the cost of her revelation. But the truth lived on, and truth once freed cannot be silenced. Weeks turned into months. Congressional hearings tore apart agencies once deemed untouchable. Dozens of careers ended overnight. Entire programs were dismantled, their files dragged into the light of oversight. For the first time in decades, reforms were more than promises. They were signed into law, codified by leaders who had run out of excuses. The name Phantom became legend again, this time not as a ghost on a ridge, but as the woman who had forced the military machine to confront itself. Soldiers whispered her name in barracks, half in awe, half in sorrow. Civilians read about her in hushed tones, debating whether she was hero or traitor. And in the middle of it all, Clara Mitchell remained unseen once more. 6 months later, the wind was cold at Arlington. The rows of white headstones stretched endlessly, each name etched in quiet permanence. Clara walked slowly, the plain clothes of a civilian draped loosely on her frame. Freedom had been conditional, a deal made in shadows, silence in exchange for release. She accepted it. She had no interest in public parades. Her steps halted at a new headstone. Lena Park, the young recruit who had knelt on the parade ground, who had looked death in the eyes and lived, only to re-enlist, inspired by Phantom's defiance, only to die in Afghanistan, throwing herself over an IED to shield her squad. Clara's hand trembled as she brushed leaves from the stone. "I should have protected you longer," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but her eyes stayed dry. Years of grief had burned the tears out of her. Around her, silence pressed close. And in that silence, the weight of her choices settled again. She had delivered the truth, but truth had not saved everyone. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, an old encrypted line she hadn't heard in months. She hesitated, staring at Lena's name carved in granite. Then she answered. "Phantom." The voice on the other end was low, urgent, unmistakably official. "We need you. Black Site 12. It's happening again." Clara closed her eyes. Destiny never asked permission, never offered peace. It always came back, knocking, demanding. Her hand lingered on Lena's stone one last time. Then she stood, shoulders squared, the weight of ghosts heavy but familiar. "Understood," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady, unbreakable. The line went dead. The wind swept through Arlington, rattling the branches above the endless rows of white. And once more the ghost stepped back into the fight. As the dust of Clara Mitchell's story settles, we are left with more than just the memory of a hidden sniper or a betrayed soldier. We are left with questions about ourselves, about the way we live, and about the people we pass by every day. Clara's life reminds us of a truth we often forget in modern America, that strength doesn't always wear a uniform, and sacrifice doesn't always carry a medal. Sometimes the greatest warriors are the quiet ones, the janitor sweeping the halls, the nurse working the night shift, the neighbor who always shows up when no one else does. They may never be seen on the evening news, but they hold together the fragile threads of community. And isn't that a mirror of our culture today? We celebrate the bold, the loud, the visible, athletes, celebrities, public figures, while forgetting the quiet workers who keep our world running, teachers, truck drivers, custodians, caregivers. They rarely ask for thanks, yet without them, everything would collapse. Clara's story is not just about war. It is about seeing the invisible among us, respecting the unseen sacrifices that shape our lives. There is also another lesson here: the cost of silence. Clara carried the weight of betrayal for years because no one wanted to hear her truth. How many veterans today walk among us, carrying scars we cannot see because it feels safer to remain invisible? How many stories are buried because society is too busy to ask? And perhaps that is the challenge for us, the audience. Do we only honor people when their secrets are revealed in extraordinary moments? Or can we learn to respect them now, in the ordinary? Maybe you, listening tonight, know a Clara in your own life. A grandmother who raised a family quietly, a coworker who never complains, a veteran at the coffee shop who never talks about the war. What would change if we saw them differently? Now I want to hear from you. Do you think America still struggles to value the quiet contributors in our communities? Have you ever discovered that someone you thought was ordinary was carrying an extraordinary story? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you for spending this time with us. If Clara's story moved you, if you believe in honoring the invisible heroes among us, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that greatness can be silent. Because legends don't always speak loudly. Sometimes they sweep floors until destiny calls them back.